Marianne Williamson is running for president. And you know what? In a lot of polls across the country right now, she's polling comparatively about as well as candidates like Nikki Haley are in the Republican primary, something she actually brings up in this interview. And she's running as a Democrat against Joe Biden. As many of you know who have been following Tangle for some time, I've written a lot about a lot of different presidential candidates. I've actually been a little bit critical of Marianne Williamson, not necessarily even because of her policies, though some of them I certainly don't agree with. Some of them I do agree with, and I appreciate and I'm very interested in seeing. But more than anything else, I've criticized a quote unquote lack of experience, something that, I've grown a little bit frustrated with when I see a lot of people throwing their hat in the ring to run for president. And so I was super happy and appreciative of the fact that she came on to chat with us. She gave us nearly an hour of her time. It was an awesome long form interview. I got to ask her that question. I told her transparently how I felt about her experience. And I asked her to make the case to me, Isaac Saul, a voter, about why I shouldn't be worried about that or why I should view her experience as a positive. And she obliged. So it was an awesome interview. It was very interesting to hear some of her perspectives. There's a lot more I would have loved to talk to her about, and maybe we'll get a chance to bring her back on. But let us know what you think in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And also let us know who else you want to see us talk to. I mean, we are reaching out to politicians, presidential campaigns, thought leaders. So if you have somebody you want to see come on the show, we'd love to hear about it. Hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks. Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off with a big, simple, broad question, I guess. Why are you running for president? Tell me a little bit about why you have jumped into this race again.
The United States needs to make a U-turn in a lot of ways, primarily in terms of economics. And if nobody else is going to say that and lay out a plan for effectuating those changes and make themselves available for the next 4 years to do it, I will. And that's why I'm running for president.
So you've been in this fight before, I think, which is an interesting part of your candidacy. You ran for president in 2020. Talk to me a little bit about what you think you want to do or need to do differently this time around. How might this campaign look a little differently than ones from the past for you?
Well, in terms of what I'm talking about, it's very similar to last time. What's different is the listening of the audiences. Americans have been through a lot. 4 years ago, all that Democratic-leaning voters wanted to hear was how to defeat Trump. And in retrospect, we can all see it was a little naive to think that if only we defeated Trump, everything would go back to something normal. He had already let some cat out of the bag, and there are a lot of little Trumpettes out there now. So I think people have been sobered. Not only in terms of that, but also we've had COVID. We've had all kinds of things happen in our national collective experience to make people willing to go a little deeper. When I say we have to address more than symptoms, we have to address root causes. When I talk about the deep despair of so many millions of Americans living in this country, the fact that it is now built into the cake, it's baked into the cake, built into the system, that there is an underclass in this country, and that over 70% of Americans report living with chronic economic stress, and that no basic establishment politician is seeking to fundamentally address that. People nod their heads. There's a lot of excitement about this campaign because I think I'm saying things that we all know to be true. It's not like I'm pointing out things people don't know, but I'm pointing out a path to actually make things better. We can have an economic bill of rights. We can have universal health care. We can have tuition-free college and tech school. We can cancel all the college loan debt. We can have subsidized child care. We can have tuition-free, paid family leave. We can have guaranteed sick pay. We can have guaranteed living wage. We can have a Department of Peace. We can wage peace. We can address the needs of our children with the Department of Children and Youth. We could declare a climate emergency. We can end America's war on drugs. People have been so beaten down, and we've been taught don't even expect what they would expect in any other advanced democracy. People have been beaten down. We've been taught to limit our political imaginations. So here's a campaign saying, we could start again. We could have a new beginning. We, the American people. We could stage a revolution at the ballot box and actually declare that we're going to cut the cord with an aberrational history of American, aberrational chapter of American history, dominated by neoliberal trickle-down economics, cut the cord and start over. Now, you're not going to even hear that from most establishment politicians because they're in the system. And that system will not disrupt itself. All that system will do is maintain and perpetuate the same basic fundamental inequality and unfairness and economic injustice. None of that's going to change until we, the people, change it. And so you can imagine a lot of standing ovations, a lot of excitement. And also, that's why I believe the mainstream media says, don't let her on. No matter what you do, don't let her on. Don't let that woman have a viral moment.
I'm curious. I mean, there's so much there I want to unpack from a policy perspective and kind of drill down a little bit on. And I think maybe the top thing is the first thing that you said, which is the Economic Bill of Rights. Could you talk a little bit about that policy proposal, explain to our audience what it is and what you hope to come out of it?
Well, first of all, the Economic Bill of Rights was first articulated by Franklin Roosevelt, who encapsulated a plan for what he wanted to do at the end of World War II. And he had actually asked the American people, what is it that you want? And they wanted universal health care. They wanted everyone to be able to go to college. All the positions in the Economic Bill of Rights, which I did mention, universal health care, tuition-free college and tech school, child care, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay. It's interesting. First of all, everything there is considered a moderate position in every other advanced democracy. The powers that be would like us to think that's really this far left stuff and we have to just work at it incrementally. That system's never going to really embrace something like the Economic Bill of Rights because the Economic Bill of Rights does challenge a corporate bottom line. It challenges the idea that short-term profit maximization for huge corporate entities should be our governing principle. That's why we don't have universal health care because of the insurance companies. We have people, over 1 million people, rationing their insulin because of pharmaceutical companies. We have so many carcinogens in our food because of the big food companies. We have chemicals in our pesticides because of the big chemical companies. We've decimated agriculture in America because of big agribusiness. We have children praying every morning before they go to school, dear God, may I not be shot today. Because of gun manufacturers, we're ramping up rather than ramping down fossil fuel extraction because of oil companies. We've been fighting wars that everybody knows were little more than piggy bank activity, by which military industrial complex price gouged the Pentagon because of them. At some point, we really need to understand this is a matrix of corporate power that economically tyrannizes the American people at this point. And this is not going to change until we, the people, step in. It's not going to change until we ourselves decide to disrupt that.
So I have a follow-up question, I guess, to that, which is that, a few weeks ago, I was watching the Republican debates, one of the Republican debates, and Nikki Haley, who's running for president on the other side of the ticket, said, in speaking about abortion, said honestly to viewers, I think who are watching that, there's no way Republicans are ever going to be able to pass a federal abortion ban. And that Republicans who were telling members of the audience that they'd be able to do that were just simply lying to them because there weren't 60 votes in the Senate. And when I hear you talk about things like universal pre-K or universal college or healthcare and, Economic Bill of Rights, the first thing that I think is even if Marianne Williamson wins the presidency, she's not going to be able to get these things passed in Congress in the current political state that we have. So talk to me a little bit about why you think this is a realistic goal and not an unrealistic one or not something that is a promise that you can't fulfill if you were to become president.
Well, there was a time in our history where it wasn't considered realistic to think you could get rid of slavery, when it wasn't realistic to think you could get women the right to vote. It wasn't realistic to think that we could desegregate the American South. No social justice movement begins or even ends with the idea that what we're trying to do here is realistic. You go for what you go for because it's the right thing to do. And when a critical mass of people realize it's the right thing to do, then that's what happens. We will have universal health care in this country, and I believe that if Bernie Sanders had won the presidency, and I think he would have beaten Trump, by the way, we absolutely would have. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, even gun owners, want common sense gun safety laws. The only reason those things would not be considered realistic right now is because of a sclerotic political system that serves to kind of keep the lid on the will of the people. So the only reason those things are not considered realistic right now is because it's realistic to realize how corrupted our political system has become. That's the only reason they're not realistic. So I'm not part of that game, and we need a president who's not part of that game. We need a president who's saying what is true and what should be. And then, the president does not have a magic wand. The president shouldn't have a magic wand. It's one of three co-equal branches of government. But the president still lays out the vision. The president still has the power to appoint who heads these agencies, to rout out all this corporate infiltration and corporate capture. The president still has the power to lay out to the country what our vision is and to work with Congress. I think that there are a lot of people in Congress who actually, it's almost like if they had the cover of a president who stood for these things. And I have the bully pulpit. So this idea that how would you get it done? How did Biden get done the Build Back Better plan? Well, he didn't. Why? Because of Manchin and Sinema. Any president is hoping that you're going to have a House and a Senate who goes along with you. But it would be very beneficial to this country. Could we just have a president who lays it down like it really is and says it, what we all know to be true? When I talk about 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, or half of our seniors living in poverty, or over 1 million people rationing their insulin, or the carcinogens in our food, or any of these things that we're talking about here, I always point out, and people just nod their heads, I said, I'm not saying anything you don't already know. We're not living at a time where people need to wake up to the inherent inequities in this country. People get it. People get the $50 trillion massive transfer of wealth from the bottom 90%. People understand there used to be a thriving middle class in this country in the 1970s, and that it has been diminished by design. Now it's time to get into the solution. And getting into the solution means we've got to do something about it. And if you think electing those same people who drove us into this ditch, and believing them when they tell you that only people who know how to drive us into the ditch should possibly be considered qualified to drive us out of the ditch, then it's not just that we have the wool pulled over our eyes, but that we're refusing to take it off of our eyes.
You mentioned in that answer President Biden and his attempt to get the Build Back Better plan passed. And, I think that raises an interesting piece of context about your candidacy here, which is that we have a Democrat in the White House. You're running as a Democrat. There are a few other Democrats who have now thrown their hat in the ring. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about President Biden. I'm curious maybe if you could tell me, one big overarching thing about his presidency that you've been excited about, and maybe one big overarching thing about his presidency that you're really disappointed about, and why you feel compelled to challenge him heading into 2024.
The president does what corporatist Democrats do. They seek to alleviate people's stress, but they won't go so far as to challenge the underlying bottom line corporate forces, which will always make the return of people's pain inevitable. Why? Because they're their donors too. Look at the climate itself. I don't care whether it's a Democrat or a Republican these days, they fall in line with big oil and they fall in line with the defense industry. The president likes to call himself the climate president, and there are very healthy investments in green energy that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act. On the other hand, the president has given more oil drilling permits even than Trump did, and he has approved the Willow Project. So he's not ramping down fossil fuel extraction. He's ramping up some green investment, but that green investment is completely nullified by how much he's ramping up fossil fuel extraction. So we need a climate emergency. We need to begin now a mass mobilization from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We need to massively invest in clean energy. This is insane, quite honestly, what we are doing and how selfish we are in relation to our own grandchildren. Same with the military-industrial complex. The $858 billion that we spend on our defense budget every year. But I'll tell you something. It's not just that it's so big and bloated. It's that we are spending money on ways to fight a 20th century war. We spend billions of dollars on bombers that they know don't even work, actually. And we spend far too little on things like cybersecurity. The president, I give credit where credit is due. First of all, he beat Trump, which was great. But let's look at some things. Let's look at the fact that he promised a raise in the minimum wage. Let's look at the fact that how many people stood in line for 7 hours because they thought they were going to get a raise. Okay, so the president did put in $15 an hour into the federal budget for federal workers, and that's good. But when it came to extending it and putting that minimum wage increase into what at that time was a COVID relief, the parliamentarian stopped him. Now, the parliamentarian has no actual political power, and I assure you that no Republican president would allow himself to be stopped by the parliamentarian. When a parliamentarian tried to block Bush fired the parliamentarian. So the president will take these incremental steps, and then we're all supposed to go, yay, yay, Biden halved child poverty. Yay, child poverty was cut in half by the child tax credit. Yay, yay, yay. Well, guess what? 6 months later, it expired, and they didn't permanentize it. If I'm in the White House, not one hungry child in America is acceptable to me. There is no reason why there are hungry children in the United States. So even under Biden, there's this acceptable level of underclass. And that is not sustainable for America, and it's destructive to our democracy, and it's immoral. That level of inherent fundamental economic injustice is wrong. It goes against everything that this country is supposed to be.
So I guess when I hear that response, I have to admit, I sense some tension, I guess, sort of with one of my earlier questions, which is, President Biden tried to push the Build Back Better plan. As you mentioned, he struggled to do that. He wanted the child tax credit to be permanent, but he struggled to do that. And in large part, that was because he didn't have, 60 votes in the Senate. And so I think this sort of comes back a little bit to what I asked earlier, which is, it seems a little unrealistic to me, I guess, that, if Biden can't get a Build Back Better plan passed, how is Marianne Williamson going to get universal health care passed when we know something like the Build Back Better plan picks up some votes from Republicans because there's infrastructure involved, or we know something like the child tax credit?
No, he could, first of all,
we know something like the child tax credit has Republican support. We know there's Republican votes for those bills that I think are maybe a little bit more moderate. I guess that is what I struggle with, is that if he has trouble doing that, how do we imagine a world where someone like you can go further?
Well, for one thing, I would talk to the American people. By the way, nobody forced him to approve the Willow Project. Nobody forced him. This wasn't his struggle. This was his choice to permit more oil drilling permits even than Trump did. This wasn't his struggle. It was his choice to approve the Willow Project. Anytime Republicans do it, we scream bloody murder. A Democrat does it, and we go, oh, poor baby, he really tried, and they wouldn't let him, even when there's no evidence that he even tried, okay? And first of all, and I know what you're arguing there, what you're submitting there is the argument that if only, and that's what a lot of people are going on, if only we can reelect him and get 2 more Democratic senators, then we could get something like the Build Back Better bill established. First thing I would say to that is he has to get elected first. I do not believe that Joe Biden is a strong candidate, and I think the Democrats are delusional to be holding on to this idea. I don't mean to be unkind, and I'm not an ageist. I'm 71 years old myself. But come on. What are we talking about here? And the president's rankings in polls are going down, 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 down every day. What I have a problem with is how the mainstream media and the Democratic establishment don't even want us to have a conversation about bringing in opponents of the president. That's called democracy. So when you ask, how could I do it if President Biden couldn't do it? I don't hear President Biden saying there will not be one hungry child in America. I don't hear the president saying within 10 years, I want to have every public school in America must be a palace of culture and learning in the arts. I don't hear the president saying we're going to begin a mass mobilization from majority economy to a clean economy. I don't hear this president talking about waging peace and a Department of Peace. I don't hear this president talking about ending the war on drugs. I hear the president talking about the high side of what already is and an incremental approach to making people's lives better. The president is bragging, remember, about Bidenomics. That's how he's going to win, on Bidenomics. Really? You know how many people are served by Bidenomics? 20% of the American people. And the 20% of American people who live with economic privilege and abundance, all of which we certainly celebrate, are surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair out there. So this argument that he could do better, first he has to win. And if you actually look at how people feel, particularly how a younger generation feels about his policies economically, the fact that he hasn't canceled the college loan debt, which he could do with the Higher Education Act, the fact that he will not stand for Medicare for all, which young people know they have, their same age group has that in every other advanced democracy, has tuition-free college and tech school in every other advanced democracy. Younger people have had it. How are the Democrats going to win in 2024 with an entire younger generation who are like done? Between no ceasefire, between the way he has been with things like the Willow Project, the way he's not standing for, he has said that he would veto Medicare for all. So this idea that somehow it's all going to be better once he wins re-election is just failing to have a deeper conversation about whether or not he can even do that.
So you mentioned there, I think, two policy proposals that stick out to me, jump out off the page that I think would be really interesting to talk about. One is the Department of Peace, and the other is the Department of Children and Youth. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about these two proposals? Because I think they're fairly unique to your campaign, and I'd love to hear you explain them and what you hope they will do.
Ironically enough, even Donald Rumsfeld said we must wage peace. We should look at peace and violence the way we look at health and sickness. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. People know now it's not enough to just treat sickness, which I believe we should with universal health care, Medicare for all, and so forth. But we have to proactively create health. That's why my whole health plan, which people can find at MARIANNE2024.com, it does as much to proactively create health as it does to treat sickness. The same with peace and violence. Violence is the absence of peace. Peace isn't the absence of violence. And as Martin Luther King said, positive peace can only be predicated on justice and brotherhood. So we have to wage peace. And there are 4 factors which statistically indicate that there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. These are called peace-building skills, okay? The 4 factors are, number 1, greater economic opportunities for women, greater educational opportunities for children, a reduction of violence against women, and a reduction of unnecessary human despair. When you are in any corner of an American city or any corner of the world, when those factors are present, you're going to have a higher incidence of peace. What we do now is we do not address those things. And then when the almost inevitable dysfunction, collective societal dysfunction, including ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, arise, our only response to that is bombs and prisons. That's absurd. We should have a peace academy as well as a military academy. And as far as peace in the world is concerned, we have to imagine, and this is what American presidents should do. You know, JFK said, if we don't get rid of war, war will get rid of us. And I want to imagine a world without war in 100 years. And then let's reverse engineer from there. Some people say that's very naive. I think what's naive is to think this species will even still live on this planet in another 100 years if we don't at least try. So I look at the military the way I look at a surgeon. If you have to have surgery, we should have the best surgery, and we should have the best surgeon on hand. But a reasonable person tries to avoid surgery. And so we need to have, like I said, peace games as well as war games. And we need to make diplomacy and peace building far more of our formula for foreign relations. At this point, you know, we sell arms to 60% of the world's autocrats. So a lot of our State Department, what we think of as diplomatic efforts, a lot of it has to do with arms sales. I think there's a real underbelly to American society and the way our government operates. And most people know it. And if you think that Joe Biden is addressing that dark underbelly, then I submit that that is an incorrect assumption.
let me submit what I think would be a counter argument to that, which is, after 9/11, we kind of waded into obviously two wars that I think most Americans understand as being failed wars. And they alone led to more conflict throughout the Middle East and destabilization. But 9/11 was also a rarity in American life, an attack on our soil. And I think a lot of conservatives would probably argue, and I actually think a lot of Democrats would argue this too, that Americans, broadly speaking, are safe. I mean, we have gun violence issues in our country that are domestic issues, but we're safe from countries abroad that we view as adversaries or threats. We, aside from 9/11, have had very few terrorist attacks in our country in the last 30 or 40 years. American soldiers, have died at pretty low rates in the last 5 or 10 years, thank God, because we've reduced the kinds of conflicts we're in overseas. So, I think people would maybe counter that argument and say, look around, Americans are pretty safe from, foreign attacks or foreign invasion or foreign threats. And that's due in large part to the large military budget and a budget that people think is making us a lot safer. So how do you take that argument to the American people? How do you contextualize that? Because I think that would be the counter that a lot of conservatives and a lot of establishment Democrats would take to you in a debate.
I think it's delusional. We were safe the day before 9/11. Except we weren't. The only real safety is to live in justice and harmony with people around you. Israelis thought they were safe before October 7th, but anybody who takes a deeper look could see that there were all kinds of dynamics under the surface, which a conscious observer would have recognized could not be endlessly kept down through military means. So I think there are a lot of Americans actually now who are absolutely, when you say to them, we have 800 military installations out there in 80 countries. Why? And people go, yeah. And for people who would say what you just said, I don't think they'd want to vote for me. But I think the point is how many people who realize that when you say we are safe, it's interesting. You realize that there are neighborhoods in this country. And what you just did was interesting because even you have internalized the invisibilization of millions of Americans who, I assure you, do not live in safe neighborhoods. We have what's called domestic war zones in this country. And please don't get me wrong, that was not a criticism because you were talking about international. But I'm talking about the whole system.
Yeah, I'm talking about military. I'm talking about the justification for military funding.
I do not believe. I think there's a lot of hatred and resentment of the United States out there. I think that the way we squandered our moral authority with the war in Iraq, the way we squandered our military authority in the last 20 years in Afghanistan as well as Iraq, has made America's position in the world quite unstable. I think there are a lot of countries that now look at us and they're not afraid of us. They're not afraid of us. And you almost get the feeling they're just waiting for an opportunity. So some people might say, yeah, we're safe. We're doing well. I don't assume that we're safe. And I won't assume that we're safe until our foreign policy is predicated on a more righteous position in the affairs of the world. We should be...
Yeah, I want to stick on foreign policy.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Well, when $858 billion on a defense budget, about a tenth of that is on our State Department budget, and about a tenth of that is on humanitarian assistance. And I would argue that even before 9/11, when you think of all the people in the world who saw the American flag decal on military installations, who might have seen the American decal on schools and roads and wells in much greater number. The Dalai Lama, I had the honor of meeting him once a couple decades ago, and he said to me, the people of the world do not see the United States as a great champion of democracy. I think people are waking up to the fact that our presence in the world is perhaps not what we like to think that it is. And if we're just trying to create peace in the world through military might, ask the Israelis how safe that keeps you.
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue to my next question because I want to stick on foreign policy and actually Israel for a second. We're obviously living in a moment here in global affairs where there is a lot of instability. There are new and burgeoning conflicts. There are old conflicts that are rearing their ugly head. And I'm curious to imagine for a moment a President Williamson is in office on October 8th, the day after the attacks on Israel. What would you do if you were in President Biden's shoes, if you were in the White House on that day? How would you address that conflict? How would you approach Israel? What would have been your path forward? Because I think right now there's a lot of people from both sides who are being very critical of the president, but I think it's much more difficult to imagine, if you had the responsibility he had, what you would do moving forward, and you're running for president. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you would have handled October 8th and what your message to the Israelis and the Palestinian people would have been.
Well, first of all, on October 7th, I appreciated his moral clarity. But you're asking me about October 8th, and that's where there would have been a difference. The president told us on the morning of October 8th that he was going to be meeting with Jewish leaders, Jewish American leaders that day. I would have done that. But I would have also said, and then I will be meeting with Arab American leaders. I will be meeting specifically with Palestinian American leaders. So you would have felt from me from the very beginning a recognition of the need for security and justice for both people. America's highest alliance should be with humanity. Our North Star is that all men are created equal, and that's not just all Americans. I'm not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu. I understand that Hamas is an absolutely horrifying terrorist organization, and we have recognized that not every Palestinian is Hamas. But I hope that people will also recognize that not every Israeli is Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu. There were hundreds of thousands of people who were protesting Netanyahu even before this happened, and there are thousands of people protesting him now. He's basically a Trump character in Israel. And his policies in the last 15 years, I believe, were in large part responsible in terms of underlying dynamics that produced this horror. So you would have had, first of all, it's not just what you would have gotten from me after October 8th. You certainly wouldn't have a photograph of me hugging Netanyahu. And I'm sure the president realized that was a mistake, because look how all those meetings then had to get canceled with all those Arab leaders. This is not how America should be, but it's not just how I would have been on October 8th. It's how I would have been over the last few decades. I would have been far more vocal about the fact that the settlements are illegal, the occupation is illegal, the siege is wrong, and that there was no military solution then. And I think what's important is to realize there's no military solution now. There have been American presidents who have tried in terms of a two-state solution, including President Clinton. And actually, to be honest, you know what American president had it right on this issue? Not only when he was president, but post-president, was Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was arguing, way back when he said he had met with Hamas leaders and they were okay with the 67 lines, if we went back to the to the lines before 67. So you would hear from me a much greater commitments to getting on with this ceasefire. This war is not in any way helping. It is, we must mourn the death of a Palestinian child just as we mourn the death of an Israeli child. Let's skip all this and go right to a two-state solution plan. This will take an international consortium. But the great powers of the Arab world, they don't want this to be a larger regional war. It's not good for them. They don't want it. They don't want Iran to get involved. So I would be working very assiduously with, obviously, Qatar, which has been the broker on these hostage release already, Bahrain, UAE, Jordan, Egypt. You would find a far more internationalist approach. We don't live in a unipolar world anymore. It's not just the United States. And like I said before, we squandered a lot of the moral authority and military respect that had been there before the last few decades and the way we have behaved. Now we've got China, India, Brazil, Russia. We must have a far more humble foreign policy, and under my administration we would.
So I have a few more questions for you before we let you go. And I appreciate you giving us so much time today. I think it's excellent to get a chance for some long form interviews and flesh out some of these policy ideas. I want to be a little transparent about my own perspective, I guess, on your candidacy. And I think one of my biggest criticisms in my writing about you running for president, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running for president, has been just simply a lack of experience, I think, a lack of traditional experience, I guess we should say. My argument has been, we have other people in the Democratic Party, other independents, other Republicans, people who have been governors, had executive positions, have experience crafting and passing legislation in the Senate or in the House. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, and you can make this case to me because I think I'm a voter who wants to hear that case. About why I should trust your experience and why someone like you is qualified for what I think is undoubtedly the most difficult job in the world. I mean, there's 2 million people in the federal workforce, so you're employing a huge number of people. You're dealing with these, incredibly fraught issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and, an economy that impacts the entire globe. Tell me a little bit about why I should trust Marianne Williamson's experience.
First of all, I stay away from the word should. The only thing I think you should do is listen to all of the alternatives. I think you owe that to yourself and to your country, and I appreciate that you're doing that here. I wouldn't say you should trust me, but I appreciate the opportunity to point out some things. Donald Trump was a very effective president in the worst ways possible, in my opinion. But his lack of experience didn't keep him from being effective. The problem with Trump was not that he did not have Washington experience. The problem with Trump is his character as a human being. And the problem with Trump is his lack of respect for American democracy and the traditions of our democracy. Now, in terms of all these people who are governors and senators and House members who understand everything I understand, my question to you is, where are they? Where are they? Are they running? No, because they're towing the line with the DNC and the Democratic establishment and what the party says. So you're going to tell me that these people are going to have the courage to take on insurance companies, courage to take on oil companies, courage to take on the military-industrial complex, courage to take on Big Pharma, when they won't even take on the DNC. So what they are is political car mechanics. The problem is not that we don't have enough political car mechanics in Washington. We do. The problem is we are on the wrong road. So a lot of what is considered qualified in America today in terms of politics, because all these people have been part of that system, means they're qualified to drive the car that drove us into this ditch. And I reject the notion that only they are qualified to drive us out of it. Let me tell you something. Their qualification is the qualification to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. That is almost disqualifying in my mind for this moment. And if it were any different, they would be here. Let's look at what's really happening here. So, I don't see where you have to have been a governor to be able to point out that children should not be hungry in America. You should not have to have been a House member or a senator to say, on my watch, this kind of economic inequity is unacceptable. So we need more courage, we need more chutzpah, we need more moral vision. Franklin Roosevelt said that the primary job of the presidency is not administrative, it's a moral leadership. We don't need more technocrats. We have so many technocrats. What we need is vision. And I'm not the greatest visionary in the United States, but I'm the only one running for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. And the American people, when they hear this argument about, you need somebody who's in there and knows what to do what? What are these people so self-congratulatory for? We are 6 inches from the cliff. We're 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our democracy. We're 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our climate. Millions of people are 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of their mental health, which is in large part based on the economic stress they live with every day. So I don't know what we're supposed to look to these people and go, they've done such a bang-up job. If only one of them are here. We're here. And they're not here because they are part of the system or at least afraid to challenge it.
Yeah, so let me offer, I guess, a couple counterpoints.
Okay.
I think first of all, I think there's probably a number of Democratic senators and governors who, are towing the party line. I certainly don't deny that. I think you'd have to be blind to deny that. I think there are probably some that also think Biden's doing a good job, and so they don't want to run against him, or they think that, maybe he's earned the right to run again in 2024. You and I can disagree about that. I don't think Biden should be running in 2024. I've said that before. I don't think Trump should be running in 2024. I think it's time for a new set of leadership, and nobody wants this rematch of 2020. But I think there are probably people who earnestly hold that position. So I guess that's one. I want to acknowledge that. Two is there is a Democrat in the race, Representative Dean Phillips, who has some experience. I interviewed him on our show a few weeks ago. He's been in the House. He's also been a business leader. He's stepped up. I think, he's maybe done something even a little braver than what you're doing, given what you're saying about the DNC. He's actually in the system and said, you know what, guys, like I'm stepping down from this leadership position because I think Biden should not be running again. And he's somebody who's sitting in Congress who's probably going to lose his job for that, which, I give him credit for doing that because I think it's an earnestly held.
As a congressman.
Right. I mean, I think he's quote unquote from trying to commit to his presidency, at least is the point that he would make. But someone like that is, doing what you're asking. I think they're stepping out of the party line. They're not towing the party line. They're going to swing for the fences, go try and be president. I don't think, he's going to mount a successful campaign against Biden, but it sounds like he's going to earnestly try. So those are two things. And I guess the third point would be about Trump, which I think is a really interesting example. I mean, on the one hand, I do agree with you. Trump was effective at getting a lot of what he wanted done. I mean, he built the quote unquote paper wall. He reduced a lot of legal immigration. He actually didn't reduce illegal immigration that much. And he fulfilled some of his promises on the military. He put pressure on NATO in ways that he said he was going to. He did a lot of stuff that, he said he was going to do on his campaign. But I think in this 2024 rerun, he's also sort of acknowledged that he got kind of played by the quote unquote deep state, he calls it, that he's promising he's learned his lesson about the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, the people he brought into his administration he couldn't trust. And he feels like in a lot of ways, he sort of got fooled. And everything that he didn't get done, he blames on the fact that there were these Republicans that he trusted that kind of stabbed him in the back, which to me is almost saying, he didn't understand DC the way he needed to in order to get done all the things that he really wanted to. So I'm wondering if you have any worries about that. I mean, imagining again that you win the Democratic primary, you go on to win the presidency, you walk into Washington, D.C., it's probably going to be knives out for somebody like you who's, so critical of the status quo. Like, what do you imagine that, how do you imagine that goes, I guess is my question.
There would definitely be knives out. No doubt about it. It's it's the modern equivalent of what Franklin Roosevelt called the economic royalists. And they would call me a dictator and they would call me a socialist, just like they did with him. He said, I welcome their hatred. Because he wasn't interested in trying to negotiate with people who did not represent justice for the American people. He was there to use the full powers of the American presidency to try to advocate for the safety, health, and well-being of the American people, and that's what I would be too. I don't even see myself as running for twice. I see myself as going in there once and laying it down in a way that you wouldn't even try to lay it down if somebody was telling you, well, you might not win again if you do that. So that's how I feel about that. As far as Trump is concerned, yeah, there were some people surrounding him who had a modicum of conscience and had a modicum of respect for American democracy and said, you can't do that, Mr. President. It's illegal, or it is completely contrary to the traditions of democracy. Those are the people that he is now saying he shouldn't have listened to. So when he says he's going to go in there and get the right people, he means everybody's going to be Sebastian Gorka. Everybody's going to be Stephen Miller. Everybody's going to be someone who actually fosters and enables his worst authoritarian impulses. That's what he's saying. And, Hillary Clinton was right when she warned us about what he would be. And I think we can all have seen enough now to believe him when he says what he would do if he goes back. He plans to just shatter democratic norms when it comes to the power of the presidency. And we should be very, very concerned because many of those impulses do represent neo-fascism. However, Franklin Roosevelt said we wouldn't have to worry about neo-fascism or any fascism. He said we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover if democracy delivered on its promises. The problem today is fascism should never have gotten so close to the door. And it got so close to the door because democracy has not delivered on its promises. That would mean universal health care, tuition-free college and tech school, like in every other advanced democracy. The complete eradication of those college loan debts, because we should never have preyed on our young people that way to begin with. We had tuition-free college and tech school in this country until the 1970s. University of Florida had a system, University of Texas, University of California, and so forth. So the only way we're even going to win in 2024 is if we offer the American people what the citizens of a democracy should expect. And that means we are offering an agenda which will actually make people's lives. Bidenomics improves the lives of 20% of Americans. And so their argument is, well, other people, you'll see it within 10 years. The electoral danger for Democrats in 2024 is not people voting for Trump. People are going to vote for Trump who love Trump. They have that right. They'll vote. You could indict him 91 more times, and certain people will still be voting for him. They'll vote for him if he's in prison. That is not the danger to Democrats in 2024. The danger to Democrats in 2024 is people staying home, or people voting for Bobby or Jill or Cornell, because they don't feel that the Democratic Party, and if it's the agenda of President Biden, is actually saying your life is going to be fundamentally improved. And incremental approaches, when you talk about the level of despair, people's lives falling apart out there. So, and when you talked about Dean is a nice man. And people, you know, that's that model, that's that template. Mine is more radical in a humanitarian sense.
So I'm curious on that note. You mentioned Bobby and Jill, Robert F. Kennedy, Jill Stein, Cornel West. Let's imagine for a moment, just looking ahead, that you don't win the Democratic primary. Is there any part of you that would consider running as an independent or joining a third party, as we've seen some other candidates already do in this race?
I would not do anything that I felt increased the possibility that Donald Trump or anyone with neo-fascist tendencies would be in the White House again.
So is that a no, I take it?
It depends on what the situation is. But right now, it would mean no. I take very, very seriously that I would never do anything that I thought helped Donald Trump or even risked helping Donald Trump.
All right. So as we sit here today, it's Sunday, early December. It's December 3rd right now. Looking ahead, I'm curious just to hear from you. Next couple months, what's on your plate? What are you hoping to get done? What looks like a successful December, January, February for your campaign? And where do you hope to be a couple months from now? How are you going to get there? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, right now I'm in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And when I leave here, I'll be in D.C. for a couple of days, and then I will be back in New Hampshire. Everything is about, I was just in Nevada. I came here from Nevada. Nevada, South Carolina. I had a great trip to Michigan. Listen, we don't have the money that other campaigns have. So we don't have the scale that other campaigns have. We all know that. But when you look at the media blackout and look at the fundraising because of the media blackout and the blackout of certain reverse elitists in this country and so forth who haven't wanted to give me a listen, that has meant my fundraising has been much lower. Given how much money we have, and given the media blackout, we have frickin' rocked it. If you can go to 13%, if you can be at 36% among Gen Z, if you can be at 16% among Democratic-leaning voters, think what we would be, where we would be if I was given a fair shot. And the fact that I am a qualified, legitimate candidate for presidency, and you have major networks who, when I poll numbers the same as Nikki Haley, and with her, it's called a surge. With me, the word long shot every time I'm even mentioned.
It's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. I know your schedule's packed, and I appreciate you sitting down for 30 minutes with us. If people want to keep up with your campaign or keep an eye on what you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
MARIANNE2024.com. MARIANNE2024.com. Join us, volunteer, throw in a financial donation if you can, and choose a new beginning in this country. That's what we need. We need a new beginning. We need a season of repair. We need to start over with some things, and we can.
Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.